Hi, Reverend Parrish here, and welcome again to Kenneth Parrish Ministries, where we attempt to teach the Word of God just one day at a time. Have you ever watched boxing? If you have, then you know that they try to make that fight as fair as possible. A boxer for one weight class, for example, does not fight a boxer from another weight class. And they have a referee who is there to make sure that no one hits below the belt or does anything that would give them an unfair advantage over the other fighter. And while there are certain exceptions, most people watching a boxing match would say that the fight was a fair one, regardless of who ended up the winner. But it's not like that in marriage, is it? Nah.
One of these days, pow, right in the kiss.
One spouse is better than the other at either debate or manipulation or some other technique that would give them an advantage over the other spouse. And they may end up winning the fight, but they end up damaging their marriage. Today, I want us to look at some facts about conflict and then take a look at some ways that we can diffuse conflict in a marriage, because there's really nothing worse than going through your marital relationship with unresolved conflict and the pain that comes from. Now, before we go any further though, I am going to quickly just give you 4 facts about conflict that we need to understand first. Because until we recognize these facts, we probably aren't going to do anything about the problem. The first is that conflict is normal. Every marriage has conflict. Your relationship is not the unusual one. Even those people who seem to never fight and always has a smile on their faces, and they call each other those cutesy names, like honey bunches or lovey lips or snuggle bunny.
You're my little churchy face, my coochie woochie little churchy face.
They all get into fights behind closed doors. You cannot put 2 people together in as intimate of a circumstance as marriage and not have times when you just don't get along. Now, if you have conflict all the time, that's a different story. That just ain't normal. But an occasional marital disagreement is to be expected. 2, conflict is an opportunity for growth. I know that this sounds like a sales job, where the guy is going to give you the opportunity to make large payments on that brand new car. But I mean it. Conflict can be an opportunity for you and your spouse to mature, to grow in your relationship with each other and in life in general. 3, conflict must be diffused, or it will destroy. Now, while conflict is normal and it's to be expected, you need to deal with it as soon as possible and in as healthy of a way as possible. If you don't take the steps necessary, you're either going to end up in divorce court or just spend the rest of your years being extremely unhappy. 4, conflict demands rules so no one gets hurt. There need to be some type of boundary set when we disagree. You can't expect to say and do anything you want in the heat of the moment and then think that the recipient of your anger is just going to get over it. We need to realize that there are certain behaviors that are always over the line and that should not be engaged in, like name calling, physical or emotional abuse, anything that would tear the other person down. You can disagree with each other without ripping each other to shreds. Those are the basic facts. What we really need to spend some time on is the second section of this discussion, and that is how to diffuse conflict in your marriage. One of the definitions for diffuse is to disperse something or to soften it. And that's what we're talking about here. How to disperse conflict so that you'll not only get along, but that you'll be able to deal with things in a positive way. Define the problem. Half the time when people get into arguments, they aren't even sure what the argument is about. What you might think is bothering the other person isn't necessarily the problem. For instance, your wife might lash out at you because you're just spending too much time with the other guys. But deep down, she's really upset because you aren't showing her the same affection that you once did, and she's jealous. A husband might be angry with his wife because she wants to go out a couple of times to lots of social gatherings. But the real problem is that she belittles him in public. Now, what I'm describing here is the issue behind the issue. Oftentimes, even the person who is angry isn't really aware of the problem at its very root, because he or she hasn't really taken the time to think it through. And what happens is that we begin fighting over something that isn't even the real problem. Proverbs 15:14 tells us that the heart of him that hath understanding seeketh knowledge, but the mouth of fools feedeth on foolishness. If we really want to diffuse the problem, we've got to define it. And we do that by digging deeper to discover what lies underneath the surface. So how do we do that? Initiate a time to talk. A married couple had a fight, and they ended up giving each other that silent treatment. A week into their mute argument, the man realized he needed his wife's help. In order to catch a flight to Chicago for a meeting, he had to get up at 5 a.m. And not wanting to be the first to break the silence, he wrote on a piece of paper, "Please wake me at 5 a.m. The next morning, the man woke up only to discover his wife was already out of bed. It was 9 a.m., and his flight had long since departed. He was about to find out and find his wife and demand an answer from her for her failings when he noticed a piece of paper by the bed. And that piece of paper read, "It's 5 a.m. Wake up. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." Matthew 5:23-24. Now, I realize there is a specific context to that passage we just read. But the principle of it is true for for any situation where there is conflict. Two parties involved in a conflict need to sit down and reconcile their problem if they're ever going to get any type of peace. This probably applies to marriage more than any other situation. Now, maybe the time to talk isn't right there in the heat of the moment. Sometimes it just might be better for one of you to say, look, I don't feel like I can discuss this rationally at the moment. But how about if we talk later this evening, after the kids go to bed and we've both had time to think it over? In other words, you call a truce. You take some time out to pray about the situation to get God's perspective. And then, when you've calmed down, you talk it over and find a resolution. You're not ignoring the issue. You're just waiting until a better time to resolve it. If you don't feel like you can express your feelings verbally, write them out for the other person to read at their own time. And then discuss it together. But make sure that you are both completely honest and upfront about the real problem. If you beat around the bush, nothing's ever going to be solved. Focus on the perceived problem. You've probably heard the saying, attack the problem, not the person. It's wise advice. If you resort to name calling or talking badly about your spouse to others or attacking the way they look or dressed or something else that's personal, you aren't really seeking to solve anything. In fact, you'll begin to drive a wedge between yourself and your spouse it's just not easily removed. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. Proverbs 18:19. The offense comes when we focus on our spouse's personal traits rather than on the issue at hand. Most people can handle different perspectives on various issues, and even they can agree to disagree. What they can't handle, however, is being treated like they're a lower life form just because they have a different perspective than you do. If I attack the person rather than the problem at hand, I've already lost the battle for reconciliation. But if I focus on the problem, my partner knows that I respect them enough to concentrate on the real issue at hand, and that just makes all the difference in the world. Feel their pain. After Peter gave instructions to husbands and wives, he ended with this in 1 Peter 3:8. Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous. I need to go out of my way to be sensitive to why my spouse is hurting. It might be something that just makes no sense to me, or something that would never bother me personally. Something I don't really understand. But if it's bothering my spouse, I need to put myself in her shoes and sympathize with the pain she's feeling. I need to do my best to see things through the eyes of my spouse and be sensitive to the pain that is there, whether I caused it or not. This is the person that I have chosen for life, and when they hurt, I hurt. Uncover the root problem. We need to differentiate between the symptom and the root cause of the problem. For instance, you might be fighting over how much y'all spent on a new car, which is the symptom. But the root problem lies in your personal values over good stewardship, priorities, or control issues. Or you might be quarreling about how often you should have sex. But the root problem might be lack of communication or unmet emotional needs or some other baggage that either one of you or both of you brought into the relationship. Maybe you're fighting about your in-laws, but the root problem is a difference in understanding as to where your loyalties should lie. Counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Proverbs 25. What I want to do is know my spouse well enough and love her sufficiently enough that I'm able to see below the surface and find the root cause of the problem. Now, if I'm doing that with her and she's doing that with me, it isn't long until we both understand the issue much better and are able to deal with it in the appropriate fashion. Set things right between you. I know people who are aware of what I've been talking about so far, at least most of it. But they are so stubborn that they refuse to do what is necessary to be reconciled. And what happens? They and their families suffer as a result. And the love and happiness that could be theirs never rises to the surface. We must be mature enough to seek reconciliation with our spouses whenever possible. Romans 12:17 through 18 tells us to recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Let me give you 3 quick tips for reconciliation. 1. Own up to your own responsibility. 2. Confess, I was wrong. And 3. Ask forgiveness. Will you forgive me? If you haven't done anything wrong, you don't want to pretend that you did. But in almost every circumstance where a fight has taken place, blame can be found on both sides. Establish a specific action plan. Now, I'm not talking about some complicated 4-page outline you need to follow or one of them Sheldon Cooper's relationship contracts. No, I'm simply talking about addressing the real problem at hand by committing to your spouse whatever needs to be committed to for the problem to be solved. For example, the husband might say, I commit myself to not overlook your feelings by really listening to what you have to say and taking it seriously. Or the wife might say, I commit myself to being an encourager for you and letting you know how much your contribution means to me. This obviously is going to be different for differing situations. The point is to let your spouse know that you are serious about doing whatever is necessary to make the situation right and then following through on that commitment. Well, I've really enjoyed this series on marriage, and I hope that you did too. We need to do everything we can in this day and age to build up our families, and that begins by strengthening the bonds between a husband and a wife. I realize that much of what I had to say goes against the cultural current that we face every day. But I also realize that if we are going to build the kind of marriages and families that we'll be able to withstand the onslaught of the world around us. It can only happen if we follow the instructions that we find in God's Word. We should pray on that and ask God to help us do that. Until next time, may the grace of our Lord